You're listening to Win-Win, an entrepreneurial community with your host, Ben Wolf.
And welcome to the Win-Win podcast. We are going to learn from our guest today how to scale a business where the deliverable is unique to each client, which I think describes a whole wide swath of businesses. But before we get into that, I want to tell people that for those of you who are practitioners, whether at firms or solo practitioners of fractional leadership, fractional executive work, I just want to let you know that fractional leadership community has an event coming up in mid-November where in November 2022, in case you're listening to this 3 years from now, where Rob Dubay, who is giving a seminar for members, purely for members of fractional leadership, on how to master the 10 disciplines to master your energy. It's based on some work by Gino Wickman, the founder of EOS. So Rob Dubay, the founder of the 10 Disciplines Company, is going to be giving a special seminar just for fractional leader members. So if you're already a member, stay tuned for your emails about that. If you're not a member of fractional leadership and you're a practitioner of fractional executive work, check out fractionalleadership.io for more about that. Again, that event's coming up in November, only available to fractional leadership members. And with that, I want to get into introducing our guest today. He is the founder and a partner at Pines Federal, a Houston-based law firm focused on federal employment law, collective bargaining, and they have a rare expertise in certain niche elements, highly niche elements of VA, Veterans Administration law. So big experts. You can find out more about them at pinesfederal.com. I count him as a friend as well. Please welcome Eric Pines. Welcome, Eric.
Hi, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, and I appreciate you making the time to have this conversation today, because the topic of how do you scale and make process-oriented a business that's highly customized and highly specific, like the law, like the law. But before we get into that, I just want to ask you if you can give people some context, maybe a 2-minute background on yourself and kind of how we got to be having a conversation about this topic today.
Sure, it's my pleasure. So I graduated from a law school in Loyola Law School in Los Angeles in 1995. Ran off and studied some in Israel for a couple of years. So religion, came back, fell into a job at the AFG 1923, which is the largest federal union local in the United States. One of those things where I had a gap in my resume, so I took the first job I could get. But I ended up finding that I was in a niche, which many of us in law know, and other areas, when you're in a niche, it's much easier to find clients, and it allows you to become a specialist in a particular field. So I went with that. I worked there for about 8 or 9 years for the union. Then I moved. To Houston, Texas, after 8 years, so I could be closer to my wife's family. When I did that, I recognized that I either have to go get a government job because I was working in the federal government field, or I have to start my own firm. So I just tried to wing it, starting my own firm, and it seemed to go pretty well, and it continued to grow. And we ended up starting in my garage. I started my garage, and I ended up taking a partner on. So I went from just me about 10 years ago to about 24 employees right now.
Wow, awesome. Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. And, and this topic of like, how do you scale and bring process to a business that is that has a highly customized work product, whether service or product, physically to clients or customers? How do you scale and processize? Which is, I know, not a real word, but how do we do that? That's a challenge. It's you face that in law, because obviously every factual situation is different. Every legal analysis based on those facts and every situation is different. And obviously, well, also the fact that you're coming from Houston is close to my heart. I got a lot of family in Houston, and my dad's family. We have people in about 4 or 5 cities throughout Texas. So I went to Houston just in 2021 for a conference, actually. But anyways, so I guess when we get into this, I think of like custom construction, general contractors. They have obviously every house, every set of plans, everything is different. The exact materials needed for every site in construction is different. At my firm, and the other hat that I wear is a firm of fractional integrators, fractional COOs. well, look, every client is different. Every leadership team is different. Every visionary, every founder has different goals and different needs and different problems. So our work product is different for every client. Consultants. I mean, this just the list goes on and on. So I guess so. Before we get into this, when it coming from a legal perspective, so before we talk about like how do you processize and how to make things more scalable, like how do things typically work in law firms?
So that's a great question. And it's interestingly enough, just like you talked about the uniqueness of different areas of professionals, there's also uniqueness in law in and of itself. For example, I'm a very big picture person who's always looked into growing my business, to acquire something, make it bigger, that feeling of actually doing something and allowing it to grow. So I've always been looking into how to do this, how to grow your business. And it's funny, when you first look, you find that the people generally who have these systems in place or these organizations that grow things are in the estate planning, wills and trust field. I think it just lends itself more to like processes, because you're doing the same thing over and over with wills. So at the same time, I do litigation. So the interesting thing is what a person is able to do is in a transactional sort of way, and what they're able to do in a litigation way, speaking specifically to your question, are going to be very different. Because each, as you said, generally each will is going to be pretty similar, or each contract is going to be generally similar, maybe not quite as much as a will, but in litigation, every case is completely different. In my particular situation, I'll just say some of my cases are about people who've been fired from their jobs because they sent like personally protected information that someone shouldn't have seen, or let's say that they did something wrong at work, or harassment or something like that. Or I'm helping somebody over here, a doctor who has been accused of maybe not treating a patient fairly at the VA. Or I'm over here dealing with somebody who works at the Census Bureau who needs a reasonable accommodation.
Right.
So it's all over the gamut in my area. So I'll answer your question now with that background. I like to look at it like, and I'll probably say this theme a few times, kind of like a symphony. Basically, you have your rhythm, your bass, where you've got, that's your processes. Basically, that's going to be something in each situation that's probably going to repeat itself. The intake process, the meeting with the clients, as far as once the case is signed up, how you deal with it, your computer program that you do for keeping your files. That's going to be your that's going to be your rhythm that continues. But then meeting with the client specifically is more of the melody, and it's going to be unique to that person. And I would just say, to answer your question, that your question is the answer in essence. You have to tell yourself that basically you need to have certain parts that are set up so you can run the business and scale and grow, but then you need to have the melody. You need to have what makes you unique, what's your unique ability, as they say. And so that the client recognizes that there's something special and unique about your touch while they're properly organized and structured within your system.
Right. That's starting to speak about how it should work. Is that how it works in most law firms? I mean, what kind of picture would you paint about how it works in most law firms that you've been in, or either how you used to be, how other people work?
Yeah, so my optimism got me jumping ahead. Good point. It's the opposite. You're exact. The question is a great question. It's the opposite. Basically, what happens is a practical thing. The reality of the situation is most professionals, lawyers, are not taught how to run it. Well, I would say almost all are not taught. There's no class in law school about how to run a business.
Right.
Basically, you know how to represent a client, and you know how to advocate for that client. So you start off by advocating for clients, and then you start to grow, and you recognize that, I could use a paralegal to help me. I could use a law clerk to help me. And then you start to realize, hey, we're pretty good at this. I'll bring on another attorney. Generally, that's how firms grow. They either grow organically by one person, which is my situation, or a lot of people leave other law firms. They're part of a larger firm and they break off to start their own.
Right.
Then you have a question of whether that person really, were they involved in the management of that firm? So what happens practically for the most part is you grow, you become bigger. And I know I've worked in EOS, and I've read about about this and the E-Myth, and they talk about this idea as small businesses grow, you sort of hit a ceiling. It becomes very, very difficult to scale yourself and to grow. And so many things become disorganized and become frustrating and become, you find yourself too big for your structure. That's generally what happens.
Right. Okay, so back to what you began speaking about, to use not real words again, processizing the processizable, which sounds ridiculous, and then customizing the non-customizable, and you are non-processizable, and you gave a music analogy, that there's a certain structure behind it, and then there's a specific music which is different in each case. So like how do you I guess how do you set that up, like brass tacks? I'll give an example. I worked years ago when I was in law school as a law clerk in a firm that did this called no fault law, which is this form of personal injury law, for cases of car accidents under $50,000 in damages. And they said that you didn't have to prove fault. You could just basically, whatever, you didn't have to prove fault. So it was called no fault law. So it was this whole statutory regime. And because statutes and regulations defined every single nuance of this field of law, a firm in that space was able to really make this super processized because there was so little difference between cases. They had all of their motions pre-written. They plugged in this custom database that they made, and you just say like, okay, I want to make this argument or click off this argument, and it would just write the whole motion for you. Like everything was merge fields and like processized, and notices and affidavits and motions to dismiss, et cetera, et cetera. Everything was processized. There was about 2/3 staff and 1/3 lawyers because there was just so much other stuff that was able to be processized. But not all fields of law, probably most fields of law, are not that uniform about how everything is the same in every case. So how did you go about, maybe get a little bit more into the weeds on how you were able to processize, more and more aspects, or break away from that normal organic growth of a law firm?
Sure. Okay. So first of all, like everything in life, it's a work in progress. I'm always trying to work on it, and I'm working actively with business. I worked with business coaches throughout my career. Most of them not in the legal field, which brings a fresh approach, because there aren't that many people in the legal field who actually can help you build your law firm, and they let you know how other fields have to be mechanized. Lawyers aren't aware of that. But to answer your question, how did I do it? So I started working with business coaches. I read a lot of books, and I talked to technical professionals. So getting back to what you were saying before, and again, wills and trusts is something, they have all these programs, like I think there's something called Wealth Counsel, where like you just you type your name in, and then boom, it prints the whole thing out. So that's not our field. That's not our field at all. We have some parts of our practice that are like that. Like we actually represent some people in disability, and so we have templates. Okay, we have templates set apart, and we just enter their names. But at the same time,
collective bargaining also, I mean, if you have 100,000 people under the same collective bargaining agreement, there's probably a lot of similarities that you're able to do there, no?
Yeah, and that's a good example where other we work for a bunch of different federal agencies. I represent the largest local. We alone represent 10 different agencies, and they all have 10 different contracts. If you're negotiating a contract, you can just look at another contract, or the previous contract is the best example. You already come in with a template. But what I'm saying though, as far as it's a lot harder in the litigation field. Let's just be clear. So when we're talking about the litigation field, you have to merge and bring in technology. Like we use something called Zapier, which is like an API. And we use Clio Online, which is our process for it's our CRM, are basically how we keep our cases on. So then we have Clio syncing back and forth and shooting us templates that say, okay, write down your case review notes. And then that case review notes automatically through Zapier with its API will shoot out to my intake people that says to them, send a retainer to this person and assign this case to X. So you have to come up with repeatable processes using technology and having the expertise of someone in technology. And you have to have the right computer programs that work with the technology. So that is kind of a planning ahead. A good example is Clio in and of itself. Clio is one of the largest CRMs for attorneys as far as keeping track of their cases. But they have every year they have a seminar where you can go there and you can talk about like the cutting edge of how these programs work together. And so you want to bring together processes that are like you said, processizable or systemizable. This is probably another word.
That's probably better to use words.
Systemizable. You want to know that to answer your question, you have to know what's systemizable and what's not systemizable. And if it is systemizable, you need to make a system for it. And if it's not systemizable, that's you, basically. That's the melody, as I was saying before. And that's what makes you unique. It's this whole idea of planting and building. Basically, you want to have the structure of the building, but at the same time, it's not, if you're just the structure of the building, there's no uniqueness of you that's going to set you apart from the person who's sitting next to you at the law firm next door. So you also have to be able to blend into your system. And I'll say one more thing before I turn it back to you. So what we do is we have these systems in place to have cases assigned, but at the same time, when a case review comes, I'll sit in on either I'll do the case review myself or I'll sit in on the case review and I'll bring my personal touch to the case that we care about the clients. I bring our values, that you come first. It's not about us making money. It's about us taking care of you. We have to make money, of course, I'm very honest, but the reality of the situation is it's about making sure that you specifically as an individual, that I figure out big picture what's best for you. And that's what everyone in my firm does. And I make sure that on a human level, while we're using those systems, we have that touch in there. So the people so the people recognize that we're unique and we care deeply about their needs, in addition to the fact that we're an excellent law firm.
Right. No, so that's a great example. Like you're doing a client intake or a case review. So there's a certain format to that. There's a process to it. There's certain places where you put that in a certain way that it's done. So that's in the same in the same activity, there's a process driven part or a systemized part, and then there's a customized part. That's the unique quality. And do you think it's necessary? I think you mentioned that in every client intake or in that meeting that you're there as the owner of the firm. Is that is that the case with all clients? Or is that something that's also systemizable or trainable that that you can get other attorneys into able to do that too, to the same quality, or it's just going to be something different without the founder there?
No, that's a great question. And it's probably the greatest difficulty in running your own business. I think anyone who runs their own business has to know that it's your baby and you want it to be a certain way, but that's part of the whole process of, you read an E-Myth or an EOS, you have to be able to let go. You have to be able to delegate. You have to. So the answer to that is, again, a work in progress in my firm, but you need to find that person who shares your values with you and who can give over that passion of the firm of what's important. And we all have different personalities. We give DISC assessments for personalities whenever we hire somebody. So you figure out who has that sort of personality, who understands your firm and can give over that personal touch. So to answer your question specifically, I'm not doing case reviews as much as I used to. There was an idea that I might come in 5 or 10 minutes to someone else's case review and give that personal touch. That's the ultimate goal, basically, where I'm just there for 5 minutes to say, here's what we're about. If you ever have an emergency or something, I'm here behind the scenes, but this person is going to help you. In time though, I'm gonna, I will hopefully retire one day, and there has to be a way to be able to have someone replace that aspect of it as well. So to answer your question is, the goal clearly is not for everything to fall to me. The goal is to have somebody who at least shares my values and is coming in, and in general, that should be the person doing the case review, but it's not always the case. And so, but you at least need to make sure someone comes in and has that backup and brings that personal touch to it within the system.
Right. Well, I think what you're saying now brings out a really, really important point, which is that for all this talk that we're having about processes and systems, that there's a precursor or a foundation that sits under the process and under the system, that the system can't work without the right people, and that you could only delegate and trust and have a process, and and good training, and obviously you have to support people and having the tools to carry out a process, but that's not going to work unless they're the right people, unless they, as you said, share your values and are internally motivated to take care of, let's say, clients or customers the same way you are, whatever your values are. That's the foundation. I mean, process is great, but that's kind of built on top of or window dressing around having the right people who can carry out those processes and take care of people. Because, as you said, I mean, that's what sets you apart.
Right. 100%. And that's probably the hardest part, especially in this post-COVID economy today. You can't
Yeah.
ask for a more difficult time to find a person who has that type of talent and that type of feeling that you're looking for in a tight labor market. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
When you find that person, you have to make sure that they know that they're appreciated and are happy where they are, because they don't come around all that often, but they exist. Humans are, we all have our different personality types. And to be honest, we're always in a process of trying to find quality people, and
Right.
we get them, we hold on to them, but people leave for unique reason. We just actually had someone who left because, and they were part of our management team. They left
Hmm.
because they were offered $40,000 more and
Hmm.
the ability to work from home all the time. So
Hmm.
we love that person. They love us, but we said go. We said, I would take that job. You can't turn it down. So a lot of these things are out of your hands, but there's a goal that you shoot for, and there's a process, of course, to try and hire, and giving these personality tests and trying to find the right find the right person is just something you constantly have to strive for and to find. But at the end of the day, there's no one that's going to replace you, but the goal is to get as close as you can. So
Right. Yeah, and 100%. I recommend that people listen to a recent interview on the Win-Win podcast with Marcus Sheridan, who's the author of They Ask You Answer. And we were talking about a similar topic. It was not talking about attorneys, it was talking about content managers is in the marketing field. But we're talking about a similar topic, which is the difficulty of hiring great people today. And he was and people should go listen to the interview, because Marcus makes the case, why if if you lay out and you clearly communicate in the way that you're communicating the role, uh, you know what people are going to be able to achieve and what the impact they're going to make, and how much the role is valued and the creativity of it, and it's not just executing like a computer, that that that's something that people want, and that it's not as hard as you think to find good people, which was an interesting take. I still need to absorb it, but probably is something that would be a good supplement for people to listen to after this episode. um, but I guess so, as a last question, if you don't mind sharing any specific examples of like processes or systems that you took from something that was a little more ad hoc before, and just one example of one area where you or anybody in the firm took something and brought process into something where it hadn't been before.
sure. I would say there's a certain part of our practice, as I was saying before, um, about disability retirement. We represent certain people. Um, a lot of firms who help people with this, basically, the idea here is that a person, in order to get disability retirement, they have to prove that they cannot do the occupation they were assigned to do. So it happens to be that a person could basically just help that person fill out the forms, help them gather the doctor's notes or the doctor's information, bring it all together, and send it into the Office of Personnel Management, which is the deciding agency in this particular case. Well, that's not what we do at all. We have specifically an intake form that asks them about what their condition is. It asks them, did they request reasonable accommodation? It asks them, do they get along with their supervisor? These are all forms that have to be filled out. There's the 3112B, D, C, all these forms. Basically, it puts in this template, they're answering all the questions. It's funny, many times they'll say to us, why do I have to fill this out? I just told you all this. Well, the reason they have to fill it out is because it automatically pulls the information in and puts it into a template of a doctor's letter. And that doctor's letter is something a lot of I think we may be the only ones, and someone who used to work with us actually helped us come up with this idea. He does it, but he's on his own. But basically that doctor's letter speaks to every single thing that the Office of Personnel Management wants to know. And then we give that doctor's letter to the doctor. Of course, we don't take this client on unless the doctor has agreed in advance to take this. And the letter is in Word. It's in Word format. The doctor takes the letter and can make any changes they want, because obviously it has to be ethical. But they know exactly what OPM is looking for. And many times they'll make some minor changes. Sometimes they take wholesale accept the letter because they agree with that, because we've gone through the medical records, we've laid it out for them, and we've talked about what's in the position description that the person cannot do anymore. So then you've got that situation. Basically, it's become a pattern where there's a personal touch that we're holding the hand of the client, but everything fits very neatly into this letter, and we have formats for each type of injury, mental injuries, mental health issues, I'm sorry, physical injuries. And then you've got, we help with the forms, and then basically we piece the whole thing together, and then we draft a cover letter in our own words, tying it all together. And that's like the human element, because the OPM clerk who's looking at it has all of 10 seconds to look at.
And maybe, and before you put all this into place, was it just like 2 months of back and forth with the doctor? Oh, you left this out, you left that out, but now you give them the letter. 100%. It just saves 2 months of back and forth and busy doctor time and secretaries 100%. In their office,
100%. And sometimes much worse. Sometimes the doctor says, I don't want to help. If you were just to go help take that case on, you were taking that person's money, right? We charge a flat fee for that. And you go through all this trouble, and the doctor says, I don't want to. A lot of times doctors don't like lawyers, let's be honest, and they don't want to help because they feel they're going to get, show up to some Social Security hearing, which is not the case in this field. So it happens to be all they have to do is write the letter. No one ever talks to them, but they don't know that. So a lot of times they'd say, I don't want to be involved. So if you haven't checked with the doctor in advance and found out that they know this letter's coming and they're willing to look at it, then in essence, basically, you've got the flat fee, and let's say, hypothetically $5,000 in your pocket, and you've got a client who doesn't even look like they're going to get disability because no doctor supported them. So having that process in place where you check in advance, having the doctor in place where doctors don't want to do the work, and sometimes
make it easy for them.
Right. They might charge you $10,000 for a letter like that, because doctors charge, $600 an hour to write letters, so. But yes, the answer to your question is yes. It's made a huge difference.
Right.
And with our passage rate and bringing clients in and doing a good job for them.
Yeah. No, it's a great example. I have a construction client that, just does the same thing. Like, look, every job is different. Every house is different. But all houses have plans, and all houses have a physical structure that you could walk through. Like, there's certain similarities. And so, if we take everything that they want to do and all their choices about the wood and, make a process, okay, the head of, the project manager has to go down with the client and the salesperson to confirm everything's right before the job. And, they're clear on whatever they need to order or what needs to be delivered. And just, so you make it a process instead of, because you make it a process that whole exercise is done before any job starts, any construction job starts. So then you don't get to the site the day the work is supposed to start and feeling, oh, we don't have enough glue, or we don't have enough wood, or it's a wrong measurement, or we're missing this room, or we're missing that room, or whatever. Everything's been worked out in advance. Before that was done, like, you think it was all on paper, you think it was all in your notes, and you show up, and then you have to come back to a site for 4 or 5 days instead of 1 day because of a lack of planning. So just an example. Again, every house is different, but the fact that you do this check and who has to be there, and how we communicate from sales to the field of what to do with the job. It's another example of, how you can bring process into something, even though every job is custom, just like with you guys, although obviously construction and legal services is very different, but that's a great example with those doctor letters and that process. But listen, Eric, really, really appreciate you coming on the show today and talking and waking us up a little bit to this idea that, because sometimes we think, for custom related businesses, we just think like, oh no, we're custom, we're fully custom. It would take away our entire unique benefit if we, made any processes. Well, no, there are activities that are repeating. There are activities that staff members, rather than your most expert team members, can do. There's computer systems and Zapier and CRMs and Clio and all kinds of systems like that in different fields that can make a lot of this more systemized, and still give, and then what's it called? There's some people have this quote that's, what's it called? Systemize the repeatable so you can, what was it? Systemize the repeatable so you can, I don't know, humanize the exceptional, or some phrase like that. Meaning you systemize the repeatable parts of whatever it is that you do so you could focus your energy not on these admin tasks or sitting for hours and hours on a computer, but on the customer relationship, on the piece that makes people feel special, on the music, as you put it.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. That's the best analogy of all. Is I always just think about, like, is music is a person to play a violin, he has to spend hours and hours learning the scales. He has to, well, I should speak to guitar because I speak guitar and I don't know much about violin, but you have to learn scales if you want to be able to solo on your guitar, and you have to learn it over and over, and it's repetitive and it's boring. But then once you've got that down, that's when your creativity comes in, and that's what people are interested when, because you're putting your heart in it. But you can't put your heart into it until you have the systems in place.
Basics.
I totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Actually, I connected to typing. I'm a writer. I've written books, and I had a semester of typing in high school. Just drilled till I got to after a while 50, 60 words a minute. But now, again, I can write whatever I want without any effort, without pecking, without searching and pecking at the keyboard. I could just type whatever it is, 50, 60 words a minute, whatever I want to communicate to people. I could focus on the content, not on the laborious act of typing, just because that became easy through the drilling earlier. But anyway, so good analogy. I appreciate it. And obviously, I actually did have a feeling that you had a music background with that music analogy that kept coming up again and again.
I just wanted to just show I wasn't making it up.
There you go. You have an actual real life guitar there.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Not a digital, not an NFT.
No, the real deal.
Anyway, Eric, really appreciate this conversation. Thank you for making the time to talk about this. And we will, again, you could find out more about Eric and his firm at pinesfederal.com. Really appreciate you coming out. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you. You too. And we'll see everybody else on the other side.
You're listening to Win-Win, an entrepreneurial community with your host, Ben Wolf.